Let's get on to one of the issues that I've been looking forward to dissecting for a while, and that Tasmanians have talked about for decades, including our next guests, because the figures that came out the other day are stark and for many people shocking. The number of students of Year 12 age in Tasmania that complete Year 12 is 53%. Barely half of our children complete Year 12. By comparison with the mainland, the national average is 76%. And before a lot of you text in, feeling like this is some sort of personal attack on how you've lived your life, it is an attack on the children that leave at Year 10 and go straight to an apprenticeship. If that's you and it's worked for you, that's excellent. But the number of children that make that choice in Tasmania surely can't explain the 23% difference between what happens here and the mainland. And many, not all, but many of the businesses employing apprentices in Tasmania right now tell us that what they want is a literacy and numeracy level that allows young people to handle complex information around computing, safety instructions, just instructions generally in the trades that they want help with. For some, the explanation of the tragic Year 12 completion rate can be sheeted home to Tasmania's unique education system, schools that finish at Year 10, where some students continue on to college. We're going to dive into these issues and more this morning, and I'd like to welcome our guests. I want to say g'day to Dr. Michael Rowan, who's an Emeritus Professor at the University of South Australia. Dr. Michael Rowan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Leon.
Let's say g'day as well to Dr. Lisa Denny, Workplace Demographer, but also Adjunct Associate Professor at the University of Tasmania. Dr. Lisa Denny, good morning.
Good morning, Leon.
And Dr. Saul Eslake. I think if we took a poll of the people here that have been talking about this issue for the longest, you might be top of it. Saul Eslake is an independent economist and Vice-Chancellor's Fellow at the University of Tasmania. Saul, good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Running back decades, Saul, you've been talking about this?
I have been talking about this since 1996.
Dr. Lisa Denny, let's start with you this morning. The numbers released by the Productivity Commission last week, 53% Year 12 completion rate. What do those figures actually say to you about Year 12 completion in Tasmania?
Leon, it tells us that 1 in 2 young Tasmanians are successfully completing Year 12 or its equivalent, which is equivalent to a Certificate 3 as well, is included in that numbers, compared with 3 in 4 young Australians completing Year 12. That is a massive difference, and it's a big concern for us. It's a concern, as you've already mentioned, about how our future workforce is going to be provided and how our businesses and our economy is going to prosper. It's a concern for the individuals that are involved that are not completing their education successfully. And given that some do eventually return to study, it shows that education is important for people.
So, on your analysis, and I'll throw this open to our panellists, there isn't a way where you could slice and dice this figure, look into it further and say this is acceptable?
Absolutely not. Let's make 2 points about that straight away. It's all young Tasmanians. It's not just the kids in state schools. That includes the kids in private schools. If you were just looking at the kids who did Year 10 in state schools, the figure would be less than 50%. It's the first point to make. The second point to make is that there's an historical trend here. My grandparents didn't complete primary school. My mum finished at Year 9, my dad finished at Year 10. I was the only one in my family to go to Year 12, certainly the only one to go to university. Both my kids have PhDs. I've got 9 nieces and nephews, and apart from the entrepreneurial florist and the plumber, they all went to university and completed. There is a changed relationship between knowledge and the economy that has been occurring over more than 100 years, but fast gathering pace, without even talking about AI and things like that. And Tasmanian children are simply being left behind because our leaders, particularly in education, but government generally, won't face the hard reality that we are being left behind, and it's their responsibility to do something about it.
So it's like, as I look across to our text this morning, a lot of people saying, yeah, but what about the people going into trades? What about the idea that the figures, 53%, is a misleading one, and that the Productivity Commission figures don't capture the number of students going into vocational employment and training or apprenticeships?
Well, if that were true, why isn't it true of every other state? I mean, it's hardly as if Tasmania is the only state where people go into trades. It's a worthwhile thing for people to do. Many tradies earn more than people with university degrees, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't benefit from year 11 and 12 education in the same way that their counterparts going into TAFE or trades do in every other state and territory of Australia. And it's a mistake to think, as people who've never done year 11 and 12 themselves would readily make that mistake, to think that the only things you do in year 11 and 12 are differential calculus and reading Shakespeare's plays. There are lots of other courses that are highly appropriate for, indeed in many other states and territories are designed for, people who are seeking to pursue careers in trades. And unfortunately in Tasmania, fewer people who are going into trades do those courses than in every other part of Australia.
So as I look around the panel, and if you're just tuning in, it's 9:25. My guests this morning, Dr. Michael Rowan, Saul Eslake and Dr. Lisa Denny. On this panel, are you in unison that we have a problem with those statistics in this state?
Yes.
Absolutely.
A three-part harmony.
So what we have is an issue.
Yeah. And also, Leon, our educational outcomes have been deteriorating over the last few years. We've had review, the 9 to 12 review. We have had countless energy and effort spent into improving our educational outcomes, and it is going backwards. So we need to actually admit that we have a problem, work out what is causing that problem, and then come up with a solution from a system-wide perspective.
And the solution is not spending more money or employing more teachers.
So give us those numbers, Saul Eslake.
Well, yeah, I mean, the figures show, as the Minister for Education noted when commenting on these figures, that Tasmania spends more per full-time equivalent student, that is taking account of part-time as well as full-time students. Tasmania spends more per full-time equivalent student on school education than the national average, and indeed than any other jurisdiction except the Northern Territory. We also have higher staff-student ratios than any other jurisdiction except the Northern Territory, and higher than the national average. So the Minister was right to point that out. What he didn't do was ask the obvious question: if we're spending more than every other part of the country except the Northern Territory, and we have more staff per student than every other jurisdiction except the Northern Territory, why are we consistently getting worse results?
Well, one argument might be, Saul Eslake, and people make this argument, and again, I can see it via text this morning, and I'll throw the answer over to you. Dr. Michael Rowan, what about the argument that outcomes here are difficult because our young people in many cases come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? You made a comparison, a study of a school in Geelong with comparable income status and education levels of parents, so it was fairly equal. What did you find?
Well, I've actually been looking at this over a very long period of time, Leon. There's an academic paper which people can download where I compared the NAPLAN and the Year 12 success of students in about, I think it was 10 Tasmanian high schools and up to 30 high schools elsewhere in Australia. What I found consistently was that while our schools do, if you consider like-for-like students, about the same or even better on NAPLAN, we are way, way behind on Year 12 attainment. So it's simply not possible to explain our Year 12 success by the fact that our students are less capable of education, or indeed that their families are less supportive of education, because where Tasmanian education does best is actually in the very early years, where the families are the most important co-educators along with the school. Just Google educational inequality evidence and explanations, and you'll find a mass of data. But very recently, in referring to North Geelong Secondary, which was...
So this is a comparison school where the students came from similar households with similar education backgrounds, so mum and dad might not have done Year 12.
That's right. In fact, I've just recently looked at schools around Australia. So I looked at Broome, Port Lincoln High School, my old high school, North Geelong, Rooty Hill, which is a school in Western Sydney, and Southport State High School. The only college which is more successful at getting their Year 12 students to complete Year 12 and get a certificate is Hobart College. That's more successful than Broome. But other than that, you'd be better off if you were at any of the other colleges, being at Broome High School, and you'd be better off being at Port Lincoln High School, my old school, than any of our colleges.
Which is far more remote than anything in Tasmania
much more remote, yes, much. Yep. And it's not just Year 12. If you look at, all this data comes from my school. Every parent should have my school as a favourite on their website or on their browser. Our colleges, on average, or in total, 10% of their Year 12 students in 2022 got an apprenticeship or a traineeship at school. The average for those 5 schools I just mentioned was 21%, double. If you look at the rate at which students at the Year 12 students at the college got a vet certificate, it was in total or on average across our colleges 38%, exactly the same in those 5 high schools. So they're more successful at Year 12, they're more successful at apprenticeship and traineeships, and we're no better at vet certificates.
On mornings around Tasmania.
And the Productivity Commission's figures actually show very clearly that the argument that Tasmanian kids don't do as well at Year 12 because we have a higher proportion of people who come from lower socioeconomic status is false. We do have a higher proportion of kids who come from low socioeconomic status households. I'm not arguing that. But if you make a like-for-like comparison, the productivity figures show that 45.3% of Tasmanian kids from low socioeconomic status groupings got a Year 12 certificate in 2022. 69.7% of the same cohort nationally got a Year 12 certificate. In the middle cohort of socioeconomic advantage or disadvantage, 57% of Tasmanians got a Year 12, compared with 75% nationally. And if you take the highest socioeconomic status quintiles, that is the kids who come from the most affluent and typically the most educated backgrounds, in Tasmania, 66.5% of students from a high SES background got a Year 12 certificate. Nationally, 82.9. In fact, put it a slightly different way, a smaller proportion of Tasmanian kids who come from the highest socioeconomic status quintile get a Year 12 than of the middle socioeconomic status quintile on the mainland.
It's an amazing statistic, and lots of them, none of which, according to our guest this morning, are things that we should be thinking about doing anything but trying to change.